Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Because there was another marquee game on Saturday in college basketball. I don't think it got lost in the Duke-Carolina shuffle. I don't think it got lost in the Arkansas and Kentucky shuffle. But I'll say this, UConn, as we've discussed, they've been struggling of late. They had beaten DePaul earlier in the week in a game that they really did not play well for about 30 minutes before they pulled away late. Lost at Xavier last week, survived Butler in overtime, lost to Creighton. They've been without Liam McNeely, their McDonald's All-American lottery pick, since January 1st. There was hope that he was going to come back in this game. There was also concern about our buddy Hassan Diarra, bad ankle. You could even see in the DePaul game. I mean, he's one of the great defensive guards that we have in college basketball. He was getting beat by DePaul's guards. Well, I bring it up because I don't think a lot of people thought UConn was going into Marquette and getting the dub. We find out minutes before the game that Liam McNeely will not be available. Hassan Diarra will, but you could tell within just a couple minutes that Hassan was less than 100%. But guess what? It did not matter as UConn goes to Marquette. Came into this game ranked number 9 in the country on the road, and nobody's giving UConn a chance. By the way, everybody on College Game Day picked Marquette to win this game. UConn's official Twitter page made sure everybody knew how wrong they were. Dan Hurley then shared it with some commentary of his own. But I bring it up because the Huskies win 77-69. We may have all, and I don't even include myself because I thought all this was overblown. But I'll tell you what, one, it felt like there were a lot of people that were enjoying the fall of UConn. Well, guess what? UConn not only is not dead yet, but I think this could be the start of a reemergence as, I don't want to oversell, listen, whatever. I don't want to oversell anything. I think they're really good. I think when they're healthy, they can play with just about anybody. And I think we maybe saw the first step of that on Saturday night. So there's a million different things we can talk about, a million different reasons. To me, what this game was really about, and this is so cliche, but it was really about just the heart of a champion. Like, UConn comes in. There haven't been many times the last 2 years, especially the last probably 18 months or so since UConn got off to a hot start last year, that Dan Hurley can really play like the underdog. Nobody believes in us. But there weren't. Listen, I picked this game on Friday's show. I did not pick UConn to win. And so it was the first time in a long time that Dan Hurley could be like, yeah, nobody thinks we can actually win this game. And you could see from the beginning that this one was different. Now, UConn has gotten off the hot starts against other teams and then struggled in the second half. Butler comes to mind. There's a few others. I think Creighton a few weeks ago comes to mind as well. This was a game. They got out to a hot start. They stayed hot in the game. Little run for Marquette before the half, but it did not change the fact, or a little more to start the second half, whatever. But it did not change the fact that this was just vintage UConn. This wasn't about being pretty. This wasn't about being sexy. This was about grinding a win and playing great defense, crashing the boards. One thing about UConn, since Dan Hurley got there, they are going to play harder than you every time they take the court. And I think that's something that's been a little bit missing this year. Certainly was not missing on Saturday, okay? So they out-rebound Marquette by 10 boards. On top of that, I think this is kind of a important note as well, is that the offense was great. Defensively, they were phenomenal. Finished the game holding Marquette to under 40% shooting, 7 of 22 from beyond the three-point arc for Marquette. So it was about defense. It was about rebounding. It was about culture. You know who else it was about? It was about the man. You can see producer Matt has the note in there. Solo ball. Okay, so for people who don't follow UConn on kind of a day-to-day basis, this is one thing that Dan Hurley does maybe better than anybody in college basketball right now. He's one of the few coaches that he can identify the guy that's not the 5-star can't-miss kid, bring him into his program, and in year 2, year 3 becomes a star. We've talked about it a million times. Jordan Hawkins, who was a lottery pick 2 years ago, star player on the national championship team, the first one in 23. That was not a kid that was a McDonald's All-American, but you could tell right away the skills were there. By year 2, he turns into a lottery pick. Donovan Clingan, people think I'm making it up. Look it up. Was not a top 30, 40 recruit in his class, okay? Well, Solo Ball is the latest example of it. Solo Ball was a good recruit. He was not a great one. Last year showed flashes. He was great actually in a win over North Carolina at Madison Square Garden, but he has turned into a bona fide star for this team. With Liam McNeely out, he has stepped up. He has been the best player in this game. 25 points, 7 3-pointers made. And then as our Torres on UConn account pointed out, how about this? Last 5 games without Liam McNeely when they've needed somebody to step up. Almost 19 points per game, 6 rebounds per game, 51% shooting from 3, 36 of 71. This guy, listen, if I don't even know if there's like a national most improved player, but he's certainly the most improved player in the Big East. I would argue he's probably the most improved player that I've seen nationally. Gone from a guy that, again, last year averaged 3.3 points per game in 11 minutes played to now 15 points per game, 46% shooting from 3, and again, 19 points per game the last 5 games or so. Beyond that, listen, Alex Caravan was much better. He had been struggling. We talked about the loss against Villanova when he missed those free throws. He hadn't been playing great. He really struggled against DePaul the other night, but he looked good. Jalen Stewart, 3 really big threes in probably the first 7 or 8 minutes of the game to establish the tone. Samson Johnson played well. But here's the crazy part, and here's what I keep going back to with this UConn team, which I think is kind of interesting and I think is kind of important to me. What I think is interesting and what I think is important is, again, they're doing this without their best player, Liam McNeely, okay? And Liam McNeely kind of gives them what they need, is another go-to scorer, another difference maker. And listen, UConn does not play again until Friday against St. John's. That is going to be a crazy game. By the way, we have a Torres on SJU page, the kid who helps me run that, Drew, who also runs our Bama page. That's another conversation for another day, but Drew does great work. Why do I bring it up? He's like, dude, Torres, you have to get back to Stores for that game. I could not make it. Now, in hindsight, I wish I had. But I just bring it up because UConn now has a week off. Dan Hurley basically acknowledged after the game that Liam McNeely will play in the next game. And what I think we're seeing is that the best version of UConn is still yet to come, okay? Because I think about this with UConn. You know what I go back to, honestly? I go back to last year with UConn. If you remember, and if you're not a UConn fan, you might not, but Donovan Clingan, remember him, dominated the NCAA tournament, all this. Well, he gets hurt late December. I'm blanking. UConn fans, you can criticize me for not knowing enough about the team. I'm just getting old. I forget if it was an ankle or a foot or whatever, but he was out for about a month. And then he came back, and you could see he was really good, but he wasn't great. And UConn really used February to ramp him up. And by the time the NCAA tournament came, he was by far the most dominant player in college basketball, completely controlled the paint, was great in the Big East tournament, the NCAA tournament. We all remember what he did to Illinois in that game, where he played one of the great college basketball games I've ever seen against Illinois, defensively, offensively, etc. And then, of course, he goes on to have great success in the Final Four as UConn wins a national championship, okay? And so I just bring it up because this kind of reminds me of last year, is that UConn was really good all along, but the best version of UConn was when they used February to ramp up Donovan Clingan for March. And so I do wonder, is it at all possible that we get the same thing that happens with UConn last year? I'm not saying they're going to go on and run the table and win the national championship, but if this team can go to Marquette, they can pretty much beat anybody left on the schedule. Now, St. John's is really freaking good, okay? But at the same time, you could beat anybody left on the schedule, especially with Liam McNeely back. So as a UConn guy, I am excited. I never bought the narrative that they were lost or that they quit on Dan Hurley or whatever. By the way, I don't even know if we talked about it, but UConn fans actually booed UConn during the first half of the DePaul game last week. I actually didn't really have a problem with it because it was just, to me, fans holding the program to a higher standard. But I never believed that the program was falling apart or whatever. I just believed they were without a lottery pick. Well, they get this win over Marquette. They're getting their lottery pick back. Solo Ball is turning into all Big East first team for sure. I don't want to go crazy and say like all American, but he's the most improved player I've seen in college basketball this year. If there's a national most improved player, he deserves it. But credit to UConn for getting this win. Not a lot of people had it, and they get the victory.